I don't want to go into too much detail about myself because I think for those of you, especially if you're attending service tomorrow, Kusunoki Sensei will explain a little bit more about who I am. But just to give a little bit of a context, I wanted to talk to you all today about a very important subject, which is, Hoonko itself, of course, but, a real important element to Hoonko, which is the Goeden and the Godensho. Okay, so talking a little bit about Hoonko in itself, right? So currently, actually, even right now as we speak, and just about 6 minutes ago at 1 p.m. our time, the Nishihon Ganji entered its third day of Hoonko. For us, it's only day 2, but for them, it's day 3 because they're a day ahead of us. Hoonko, for those of you who do not know, is a week-long commemoration event for Master Shinran. And it starts on every year, regardless of the day. It starts on the 9th of January and lasts until the 16th. So there's about 4 services per day, if you can imagine. There's a whole table chart. I forgot to bring my program from the Hoonko that I participated in, but if you can imagine 4 services a day, that's a lot of work, a lot of priests. Hundreds upon hundreds of Jodo Shinshu ministers attend this event and participate in some capacity or another, and 1,000, I think of close over 1,000, maybe 2,000, maybe even more. Members from around Japan, even from abroad, will attend this celebration. Okay, so all the rituals that are performed during this have to do with Master Shinran. Of course, the most popular reading that is done or chanting that is done is, of course, the Shoshinge, which is done with the Junirai cadence in a lot of these rituals. But there's also a special way of reciting Shoshin Nembutsuge called Shinpu style that's done on the 16th day. So many of you are actually already familiar with Shoshin Nembutsuge Sofu style because you've probably heard Kusunoki Sensei chant it before. Sensei, do you chant Gyofu style here too? Not recently. But if you can listen to, if you ever go to Japan and on any during the month, whatever month it is, like February to December, the 16th of every month they chant Gyofu style. So it's a beautiful, more melodic way of chanting Shoshinge. And then, of course, on the 16th, there's a message delivered by Gomonchu-sama. And all throughout the week of Hoonko, there's 4 separate scrolls that are hung. They are called the Goeden. Okay, this is a compilation of pictures that depict the various important points and of Shinran Shonin's life. Okay, and there is a direct correspondence to that with the reading of Godensho, which is the biography of Master Shinran, okay, written by Kakunyo. And we're going to go actually a little bit more into what these elements are in just a moment. But if I could direct your attention, and I'm sorry, for those of you who are online, you can't see it in person, but if I could direct your attention to the table here, you can see this beautiful scroll that's laid out. This is a nice, concise, smaller scroll of the Goeden, okay? Normally, these pictures are broken up, right? So there's 4 separate scrolls, but this one, all the aspects fit very nicely onto one scroll here. And it might be a little confusing, but the way to properly look at these, or to go in order, you start from the top, go to the bottom, cross from the bottom, and then work your way up. Okay, so that's how this is depicted here. Okay, so so those are important things to keep in mind. Okay, so but first, what are these 2 components and why are they so important, right? So what we have here is a close-up in the picture is the final picture of Master Shinran resting in his columbarium at what is today Otani Honbyo. For those of you, just a show of hands here, how many of you have been to Japan before? And how many of you have been to Otani Honbyo? Okay, so wait, have you been to, for those of you who have been to Japan but not been to Otani Honbyo, have you been to Kiyomizu Dera in Kyoto? Yes. So Otani Honbyo is right there at the foot of the, so you might have even walked through it, not even knowing that's what it was. So, that's where that's where our mausoleum is. And if you pay a special fee after you pass away, some of your ashes could actually be stored there. And there's niches or little tiny niches for your name for when depending on where you are and everything. And sadly, the Northwest I don't think has one yet. I checked the last time we were there. I couldn't find it. So we need to do something about that. We need to do a capital campaign to get. I didn't see a Northwest district.
Betsuin has
Seattle Betsuin has one.
in the Northwest District.
Oh, well, we need.
I need so not okay.
Okay. Well, we need to. I need to get so Tacoma and White River and the other temples of the Northwest can get on the map there. And then what we have on the left, or I guess no, wait, sorry, your left, is a box. It's a Godensho box. So this is the box that these that the 2 volumes are kept in, actually, or stored in, when the ceremony for the Godensho is not happening. Okay, and just to give you reference, this for a little show and tell, these are what this is what the books look like. Okay, and then we'll actually get to open this, and then I'll recite one of the chapters for you in a little bit later. So both are displayed and recited during Goshoki Hoonko, specifically on the 13th of the month. Okay, so that is when they have the reading. It's in the middle of Hoonko. Okay, so and as you can see, there's it's done actually in the evening, and it's done a specialist, a person from the Honganji's ritual and chanting department recites this by candlelight. So, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about the Godensho first. Like, where does this scroll come from, and like why, what's the historical significance behind it? Just to give you all some reference as well. My undergraduate major in college was history, so I consider myself to be somewhat of a historian because I thoroughly enjoyed reading about the history of Japan. And that was my major in undergraduate, was history with a focus on Japanese history. And I will say this, it's impossible, and I mean impossible, to study about Japanese history without learning a little bit about the Pure Land sects of Japan, specifically Jodo Shinshu. For many historical significant events that actually involve our sect. And in fact, it wasn't until I went to college that I realized just how deep our sect was embedded within Japanese society. Okay, but to give you a little bit of context as to what this document is. This was written back in 1295, and it was written on the 33rd year memorial of the passing of Shinran Shonin, and it was authored by the 3rd Monshu of our sect named Kakunyo Shonin. Okay, so, and we're actually going to, what's a little bit nice is in the second half of this seminar, we'll actually talk a little bit about who Kakunyo was and why he's so significant in our tradition. Okay, but and if you look at the point there as well, 33rd year, you notice that year is also is not by accident either, right? So you all know that for those of you who observe memorial services for your past ancestors, right? You have, of course, 1st year memorial, 3rd year, 7th year, 13th year, right? 17th year, 25th year, and then you get to 33rd year. That's the next one, right? So all of these dates or all of these memorials are significant milestones that were taken from Buddhist tradition. Okay, it's not just Jodo Shinshu. In some ways it does seem somewhat arbitrary, but at the same time, these come from other like older Buddhist schools like Tendai, and even going back to Chinese Buddhism as well as to how these memorial dates got set. So in some ways it's arbitrary, but in other ways it's not, because nothing happens in a vacuum. And what's neat about unfortunately, so there's some bad news about all of this is that the original document was both the illustrations and the biography side by side. Okay, so there were really back when this was first created, there was actually this large scroll that had depictions of all the pictures and everything, and then the not just the pictures, but then the corresponding words that went along with them. Much of the legends, and I'm saying legends, right, of Shinran comes from this document. But of course, right, because when you think about Master Shinran, he himself did a lot of writing, but he didn't do a lot of writing about himself, right? He wrote about his thoughts and his understanding of the Jodo Shinshu doctrine, but he rarely kind of talked about himself, and he would only give like small hints about this or that, right? And then after that, there's and then after that, we can only get what we know of Shinran Shonin's life from legends like on Mount Hiei, and then of course the Shini's letters, right? We know about Shini's letters as well. And then so the Godensho contains 15 chapters. So now let's talk about the let's talk about the counterpart to the Godensho, which is the Goeden, the illustrative counterpart to the biography. So we don't. Unfortunately, I tried to do some research on this person, but and I probably would get more luck if I read Japanese history books about art. But we have to also remember that a lot of the temples in Japan are houses to a lot of very spectacular art pieces, right? Even Nishihonganji itself has walls that have beautiful paintings and depictions of these things. So, and that has to do with at the time, the political clout that many of these institutions had at the time. So if you had a temple that was famous, or very influential, they could commission like a famous artist to make a depiction or make paintings for them. Kind of similar when you think about it to like the Catholic Church and people like Michelangelo, right? Very similar history there. So the original painting was painted by an artist named Joga Hogen, who was commissioned by Kakunyo to actually make this. But then, unfortunately, I wasn't able to find a lot of information on him, just some mentions in artistic history books about Japan. They actually, but that should even still highlight how important this painting is, even if it's just like a minor note within a Japanese art book that's printed in English. But sadly, the original scroll was destroyed in a fire during one of the civil wars that hit Kyoto. So, and that's another thing that we have to remember as well when we go to Kyoto itself, is that as old and as ancient and as authentic, right, and I put that in quotation marks, as it looks, many of the buildings are not the originals, because Kyoto has experienced a lot of violence in its history and a lot of destruction. And even as recent history, of course, there's World War II, but as what we call the Bakumatsu era, where the shogunate power finally fell, there was a large civil war within the streets of Kyoto. That it was in the late 1800s, and in fact, only a few years after our own civil war here in the United States. And so, sadly, due to these circumstances, a lot of buildings and a lot of original art pieces, scrolls, wonderful treasures were destroyed because more than on one occasion during these civil wars, Kyoto went up in flames. They decided, a lot of these revolutionaries decided that if, they can't change it with policy, they'll change it by burning the whole institution down and destroying everything and trying to rebuild it. So unfortunately, Otani Honbyo and other parts of the original temples were subject to this. But each panel of the Goeden depicts the various chapters of the story of Shinran, okay? And the panels are divided into 4 scrolls and are hung during Goshoki Hoonko. So, and this is actually specifically hung in Goedo. So, show of hands, how many of you have been to Nishihonganji before? Okay, so for those of you who do not know, there are 2, every Nishihonganji, or like a Nishihonganji, like a both Nishi and Higashi Honganji have two Buddha halls. One's dedicated to Amida Buddha, and the other is dedicated to the founder, with the subsequent head priest or monshu that followed. Okay, so these are specifically hung in Goeden Hall, the hall that is significant, or that depicts and whose central object of worship or reverence is Shinran Shonin. And unfortunately for all of you, unless you're one of the people who can sit in the Onaijin or in the Yoma, it's kind of hard to see because it's further away. But it'll be on your left side, which is in the Yoma area, next to the dynastic scrolls of the past Monshu. So the reading of the Godensho at Nishi Honganji, right? So the reading of the Godensho takes place in the middle of the week during Hoonko, okay? And it's read by one of the senior priests of the chanting and liturgy department of Honganji, or the Shikimubu. And all 15 chapters are read, okay? And and just to give you some context, it takes about an hour and 10 minutes for the whole document to be read. Why is this? Because the Godensho is read in a very similar fashion to that of Gobunsho. How many of you have heard Kusunoki Sensei read Gobunsho before? It sounds like Shonin Chiryu no Gokanke no Omomuki wa, correct? Right? So it's if you can imagine, right? Like it's read even slower, and there's even more intonations. And in just a moment, I will demonstrate what that sounds like. But but the Godensho, the reading of the Godensho actually is, I should say, a requirement for all people who wish to become full-fledged Joroshinshu priests. So the first level of ordination is called Tokudo, but then the next level of ordination, when you are actually trusted by the head temple to run a temple by yourself, right, or to actually give dharma talks, is Kyoshi level. But in order to get to that point, you actually have to be able to read somewhat competently a chapter from the Godensho. Okay. Now, to make this, somewhat shorter, right, when you actually are tested on this to a degree, they only have you read Volume 1, Chapter 1, and then Volume 2, Chapter 6 and 7. So you start at the end, and then you immediately skip to 6 and 7. But even still, right, it's to, once again, not only add a level of difficulty to the ritual aspect of what we as Joroshinshu priests are required to do, but to, once again, really delve into sort of the, understanding of the person who we are revering, right? The understanding of who Shinran Shonin was and why he's so significant to our tradition, okay? So it's, and then on top of that, in Japan, I should say as well, that many temples also take part in reading Godensho. Now, not every temple does, but if a person who is either the head priest of the temple, or they have a relative who's a priest with the Tokubetsu Homuin, which is the chanting and ritual license, they will most likely have them read chapters 1 and then volume 1, chapters 1, and then volume 2, chapters 6 and 7 during their actual Hoonko service. So, so again, this is still actually this is still a very important document in Japan, and actually I think should be a document that is more explored here in the United States. Unfortunately, I think the last time that that this was widely heard throughout the United States was back in 2018, and that was actually the year that I left for Japan, and after graduating from the Institute of Buddhist Studies. So it was actually at the National Council that took place in Sacramento, and we actually had two priests at the time read those two parts, and then thankfully Reverend Dr. Takashi Miyaji gave an explanation there of what the Godensho and what the Goeden was. But ever since that time, I don't think that we really did that at a national council. But again, for a person to, especially from the United States, I would say, to go to Nishihonganji and try to sit through the whole thing, it can be a bit much because we're not used to listening to classical Japanese, and it's a long time to sit through the the service, especially if you were like a student like myself and Kusunoki sensei at the Gonshiki Shidosho. You had to sit through this whole service sitting seiza, sitting on your knees, and then after that, immediately after the Godensho is read, they do they have what's called the otonin come in and chant Shoshinge really fast, and we had to immediately get up and move a few inches forward, sit down in seiza again, and chant through the whole Shoshinge Nembutsuge pretty quickly. Yeah. So just and again, to give you an idea, many of my sensei in Japan, knew that I was a Gaikokujin, right? Even though I'm ethnically Japanese, I was born here in the United States. I'm a Yonsei, and one of the sensei who had the most effect on me at the time was my Ryuteki sensei, and his name was Ama sensei, and he worked in the Shikimubu department. And in fact, actually, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but in the live streams, you could actually see him in the front of the Sandanshu who was playing Gagaku, okay? But at the time that I went to Gonshiki, he was the one who was selected to read the Godensho. And so, anyways, so like I said, these sensei knew that I was Gaikokujin and I wasn't used to it. So he knew that. So after the Godensho and the Shoshinge were all finished and everything like that, we all all of us painfully stood up, and then we had to go back into the inner sanctum of Honganji to the back. And then Ama sensei was there at the top of the stairs to greet us, and I gave him a small, and he saw me and he kind of laughed and he went over to me. He was like, "Otsukare-sama deshita, otsukare-sama deshita," because he acknowledged that he knew that my legs were probably, I couldn't feel them probably. But Ama sensei was able to, Ama sensei delivered a beautiful rendition of what the Godensho sounded like. And of course, in just a moment, I'm going to read you a chapter here. And I will warn you, I sound nowhere near as good as Ama sensei, because this is his profession. This is what he does for a living and everything. But I should also mention and say that even though for a lot of members, right, they understand Japanese and everything, but it's also not just, the words themselves, but it's how they're read, right? This is why I think sometimes reading things, especially like the translations in English, while they're helpful for us to understand, there is, unless you're reading Shakespeare, or performing Shakespeare, I would say, there isn't a good way to sort of translate the feeling of reading things like Godensho, right? Because they're supposed to be read in a very declarative sort of style, almost the similar, you would see in like old movies in medieval times where they would unravel the scroll from the king and they would make these grand proclamations, right? Japan still does this during special services. And it's definitely something that's worth listening to, even if you don't understand the words. So here we have this is what the Godensho books look like, okay? And inside, the text looks a little like this, okay? And then for those of you online, they're in classic katakana. Oh, we'll back up. Sorry, thank you. It's in classic katakana. So you see, and then not only are they in katakana, but there's also it's in what's called kanbun. So you have to be able to read kanbun. Now, thankfully, there is furigana on the side here, but you also have to know. Okay, I have to skip this one here and then all there. But so this is the first chapter. I'm not going to read the first chapter. I'm actually going to read the second chapter, specifically because this is a chapter where Master Shinran actually meets Honen Shonin, which is, a very significant part of Shinran Shonin's life. So actually, before I read it in the classical Japanese, and this is actually what I do as well when I read Godensho, and especially for funeral services, like where I read On White Ashes, I read it in English first, so that way people know what I'm about to say, and that way, that's actually what I would give advice to all people who choose to read Godensho: is read it in English first. That way, it gives the people the information in their heads, and then when you read it in Japanese, it doesn't feel rushed. Because then, because all of us in this room here, minus Kusunoki sensei, are probably native English speakers. So if we listen to it in Japanese first, we'll probably want to rush. It's okay, let's get to the English thing so I know what I'm reading. Okay. So to give you an idea, I'll read what it says in English first, and then I will read it in Japanese. Okay. And it's short. Okay. In the spring of the first year of Kennin, or otherwise 1201, when Shonin was 29 years of age, the desire for renunciation of the ephemeral world drew him to Master Genku at his hermitage in Yoshimizu. Since in the latter days people's spiritual capacities had become inferior and the narrow streets of difficult practices too confusing for them, he had been seeking the great path of easy practice. As Master Genku, the great patriarch who promulgated the true teaching, explained to him the intrinsic depth of the teaching and the breadth of the doctrinal principle. He instantly realized the essential way of salvation by the other power and attained true mind, which is the direct path to the Pure Land, the path which accommodates ordinary people. So that is what I'm about to read to you in English. Here's what it sounds like in classical Japanese. 第二弾兼任第一の暦春の頃少人29歳隠遁の志に惹かれて元句上人の吉水の税本に尋ね参り玉井家これすなわちよ下り一つはなくして南洋の初老迷いやすきによって異業の大道に赴かんとなり新種上流の大祖上人ことに衆の延々の尽くし今日の日を極めてこれを述べたもに立ちどころに足り摂生の召集を受得しあくまで凡夫式入の心身の献上しましましけり。はい。So that is the reading of the second chapter of the Godensho. So most of the chapters in the Godensho sound just like that, and they have a lot of those real sometimes abrupt intonations in there as well. There's actually one, I think, in further along in the volume 1 where the reader actually has to almost shout like "Shokunen," like that. So it's very stylized in old Japanese culture. Oh, oops, sorry, that was meant for what I just did. So I've just come to the end of my first part of my presentation here, but are there any questions so far? We can take a short break here for intermittent questions on what you just heard or what I just said. Because right now I've talked about Godensho kind of more in a practical way, and like where this takes part in, Hoonko, kind of like why it's important, but then also like, sort of, what the meaning of it is, right? The next part of this presentation is going to be more of a history lesson about the author and, actually get into more colorful details there. But before I continue with that, are there any questions that? Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. So thank you, Tyler. Okay, so you all know what this mon is, correct? You all know the one at the top. That's the Sagare Fujimon, right? The top, the crest here at the bottom. And by the way, so this first one is, of course, is the emblem of our school of Nishi Honganji. But I should actually mention that that crest has not always been Jodo Shinchu's crest or Nishi Honganji's crest. It came a little bit later in history. We kind of adopted this one. This one actually is way more significant in historical context because it's the same crest as the Toyotomi clan. So for those of you who do not know Japanese history, there are 3 great warlords / uniters / rulers of Japan in the 1500s. Okay, the first is Oda Nobunaga, who pretty much pacified Japan during the Warring States period. Okay, one could argue that he conquered all of Japan. After him, his second in command was named Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He actually went through many names, right? The samurai class during ancient Japan changed names like they changed clothes. Right, like Shinran, for example. Shinran wasn't his name when he was born. Does anyone know what Shinran's name was when he was born? Besides Kusunoki Sensei, Atsuwa Kamaru. That was his birth name. Okay, and then he went through many other names before he dubbed himself Gutoku Shinran. Excuse me. And so, why is the Toyotomi crest an emblem of ours, or one that signifies our school? This is because Toyotomi Hideyoshi was actually a very politically savvy ruler. And Nobunaga, his predecessor Nobunaga, actually fought against us for over 11 years. How many of you, so for those of you who have been to Japan before, how many of you have been to Osaka Castle? So if you can imagine, Osaka Castle was not always a castle. If you can imagine, a long time ago, back in the 1100s, and beyond, oh, sorry, not the 1100s, sorry, the 1400s and beyond, there was a huge, gigantic Honganji there called Ishiyama Honganji. And we had kind of our own little economy / utopia, private army type situation. And Nobunaga was not very happy with us because we were not doing what Nobunaga said. So his solution to that is violence, and he tried to attack us, and we were able to hold strong for 11 years. Finally, on the 11th year, we negotiated into surrender, and we ceded the land back to Nobunaga. And then Osaka Castle was later built. That being said, Nobunaga, and then even later on, Toyotomi Hideyoshi realized just how powerful of a movement Honganji was. Nobunaga knew that what Nobunaga usually would do is he would conquer the land, kill the warlord or kill the leader, and then, crush all hopes for rebellion later. But he knew he couldn't do that with Kenyo. And he knew that he couldn't do that to the leader of Honganji. Because if he did, he would have another at least 20 years of rebellion on his hand. Because the movement was so powerful. So Toyotomi Hideyoshi knew this, and he actually pacified us into sort of a political truce by actually granting us more land and granting us more gifts, granting us money, patronage, and even like titles, right? Land titles, all those wonderful things that ancient warlords love so much, right? So Honganji is not exempt from this, right? Yes, we know Honganji is a Buddhist temple and that it's supposed to be a place of Buddhism, but it's also a place of politics, and it's also a place of diplomacy. And we were on very good terms with the Toyotomi clan at the time, so good, in fact, that we also were given permission to use their crest. Now, we specifically utilize the Toyotomi crest to sort of, acknowledge that history, because, of course, the samurai class has been abolished since the 1800s. But that being said, yes. So for example, if you see these two combinations, especially, you know that you're at a Nishi Honganji temple. Higashi Honganji does not use those crests. They use different ones. That's my long-winded answer to your question. Yes, Alex.
Okay, so we have a question on Zoom from Reverend Sarah Parrott. Yep. She said, are the markings in the Godensho similar to the Gobuncho to explain the inflections?
Yes. Yes and no. Because I wish Reverend Sarah were here so I could hear this, she could elaborate more on the question. But see,
okay.
So the reason why I say yes and no is because I'm wondering if she's talking about the markings that are in what's called the Gonshikishu, which is a modern day document, right? But the markings in the Godensho, yes, they are similar in like, there's like, you'll see little black dots and everything like that, but there's also like little like brushes along the way there to sort of indicate things. But you know what? I know you probably can't, for the folks online, you probably can't see, but for those of you who are in person, you notice I wrote all of the notes in there, okay, with a pencil, right? Because when this was first handed to me, this was completely blank of notes. So that's part of the esotericism of Jodo Shinshu as well. People say that, Jodo Shinshu Buddhism is not esoteric. I'm like, all Japanese Buddhism is slightly esoteric here and there. And the reason for that is because there's no way I'd be able to read this document without the instruction of a teacher to tell me, where the intonations and the classifications are. So there are some. Yes.
Oh, I was going to say Sarah can come off mute, or yeah. You can hear her.
Yeah, but sorry. But to answer your question, there are similarities, but there are differences, and a lot of the similarities that you may see also are probably modern notes of what the Gobunsho looks like now, if that makes any sense.
It does. Thank you. I was just curious because some of the sounds were very similar to Godensho, and then there were some different ones too. So I was curious if the markings were similar.
Yep. So, Sarah, when I see you in person next time, I can, or whenever we have our next training, you can take a look at the book, and you can see I made notes that were specific to me. Like, okay, I have to read it this way, right? And that's actually how, if you become a priest or if you become a student of Buddhism or chanting, that's how it should all be within your books. So there's that. Are there any other questions on the chat? No? Okay. Any other questions from here before we continue? Yes. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. I'm going to definitely wet my whistle for a little bit, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. Hi. Okay. Thank you. But let's talk a little bit about, going back to history, let's talk a little bit about the author of the Godensho. So we have to remember one thing, right? Shinran Shonin never made an autobiography. And we also have to remember this is a story about a religious figure. So one of the chapters that I explained to you was pretty tame in terms of its religious ethos or its religious tone, right? But if you read the whole entirety of the Godensho, there's a whole lot of like religious phenomena that occur in there, miracles, right? So I mean, we even know about one of those times when Shinran Shonin was secluded at Rokakudo, and he has that vision of either Prince Shotoku, depending on who's telling the story, right? Either it's Prince Shotoku or Kannon Bosatsu, right? He has that vision. So so the Godensho is also filled with much of these stories as well. And we have to remember who was actually writing the story. It was Shinran's great-grandson. And so, so we have to remember that, Kakunyo Shonin highly revered his great-grandfather, okay? And if you look at the dates of his birth, actually, he was born, during while Shinran Shonin was still alive. So how close he and his grandfather actually met, right? I can't say for certain, but here's this is actually something that's not written down here. But one of the interesting stories we remember about Shinran Shonin was the disowning of his own son, Zenran, right? So in one of the stories, and we even have letters from Shinran Shonin, one of the letters where he actually formally disowns his son Zenran because his son was spreading false teachings or lying to the followers of the Jodo Shinshu, saying things like the Nembutsu is like a wilted flower, and I alone have the secret teachings of, Jodo, of what Shinran was saying. So Shinran formally disowned his son. Now, here's where the story gets interesting about Kakunyo. Kakunyo does not actually come into contact with or really have his religious awakening. I'm going to call it that, right? His religious awakening until he meets his uncle, Nyoshin, who is the son of Zenran. Interesting, right? So Kakunyo actually received his Buddhist education, one could argue, from his fun uncle, right? Like Nyoshin. Because that interesting family dynamics, right? And what's interesting, if you look at the dynasty of the Bonshu, the first one obviously being Shinran, who is considered to be the founder of the school, but Kakunyo is not number 2, he's number 3. So who is number 2? According to our according to our school or our understanding, it's Nyoshin. So, and by the way, so we have to remember that this particular, like when you look at like the Jodo Shinshu International Service book and you see the list of names in there, right? Like Shinran never really declared himself like, I am the founder of this school, right? He never actually did that. So yeah, I don't know if Tyler actually has the book right here. You have to go a little bit further, but there's a page in there that lists the names of the Monshu, right? So one thing that we have to remember here, this is where the part of the seminar gets fun because we get to talk about political history and sort of like, kind of the scandals and things like that. But we have, the until recent history, and then in some cases here and there, the passing of the Monshu to whoever the next Monshu is, even in Nishi Honganji history, is not like this, passing from father to son. Some of you may know I have a son who is on the way right now, and but again, and but of course I don't expect my son to follow in my footsteps as a priest. But again, right? Like again, right? Like it should. What page is that? Page 77. Thank you. Yes. So if you flip to page 77, this actually lists out the names of the head priests. But we, again, even though it looks like it, we should never assume that this line of priests is a straight line, right? It's never this down, 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 down. There are times, even Renyo, right? Renyo was not the firstborn son by any means in his history. And in fact, actually, Kakunyo was not the first choice of who was going to take over this spot either, necessarily. So, we'll get into that in just a second here. But going back to Kakunyo is actually a large reason as to why we do things the way that we do things today. Renyo is like the second reason, or like he's the person who also established a lot of what we do. But Kakunyo is the one who actually started this tradition of paying homage to Shinran every month, okay, on the Meinichi. Now, most likely, if we're going to be totally technical, right, Shinran, right, Shinran's death day in the Western Gregorian calendar is January 16th. But if we're going to follow the Chinese lunar calendar, it'll be November 28th. Okay, and so that is, and Higashi Honganji does their Hoonko on that day. So if we're probably going to get technical, right? Like it was most likely he commemorated the passing of Shinran every month on the 28th. Okay, but all of you would know the story. Well, probably not, but many of you know the story of Kakushini, right? Shinran's daughter. And Kakushini, right, helped to establish the structure of what is today Otani Honmyo. Now, while she did do that, it took a little while for Kakunyo to actually take control. And the reason was because when Kakushini passed away, she didn't, like when you leave everyone better write a will, right? And clearly give instruction as to who you want to leave your things to. But and Kakushini did do this, but she didn't actually leave the land itself or the building to Kakunyo. In fact, she actually left it to kind of like a board of trustees, if I'm going to put a modern equivalent of Jodo Shinshu followers. Okay, so right, so like right here, right, so even at Seattle Betsuin at Tacoma, right, Kusunoki Sensei is not like the owner of Seattle Betsuin, right? He's the head minister of the Betsuin, but a board of governors actually is the one who not necessarily owns the building, but also manages it to a large degree. And in Kakunyo's time, it was somewhat similar. But eventually, through his own political savvy and his own ability, Kakunyo was actually able to gain control of the governing body and was able to even outmaneuver, I should say, his half brother, who was also laying claim to the head priest position. Okay, so a lot of like political drama, like Downton Abbey and other political things that you like watching. Okay, we have our own thing of that. Yes. Yes. And then actually, and then eventually, he converted it was actually through Kakunyo that he officially coined the building as a temple. Okay, so beforehand, all that it was a mausoleum, right? It technically was not seen in the eyes of the government as a temple yet until Kakunyo actually took over. And actually, I should also mention that Honganji was not the first choice of the name of the temple. And you could all, you can all get this through Dobbin's book, but he actually, Kakunyo actually, I actually had this thing here. Ha. He actually was. He actually had another name for it, but the Tendai institution got mad. They didn't like the name, and so he actually had to Senjuji. He wanted to call the temple Senjuji before he dubbed it Honganji. So, let's talk a little bit about Kakunyo's feelings towards Shinran, right? So if you read the Godensho, you'll see that Kakunyo was incredibly reverent towards Shinran. Like, he idolized his great grandfather. And in a sense, right, when you think about it, he had a large reputation to live up to, right? Like when, like if your great grandfather was Abraham Lincoln, right, and if you still have the name Lincoln, maybe people have a lot of expectation for you, right? And Kakunyo actually was, Kakunyo put his time and energy into and if anything, here's what we'll say. Kakunyo put his time and energy into memorializing Master Shinran, right? And if there's any reason, or if we should say if there's any reason why we do Hoonko so reverently towards Shinran today, it's because Kakunyo started that culture, okay? Shinran himself probably would not want all this hoopla done about him. But, again, once you've passed away, or again, once your influence and your actions have caused this wave of Nembutsu followers to flourish, right? You don't really have a choice in the matter, especially after you've passed away. How people choose to view you or see you is sort of beyond your control. And so, that's why it's important for us to remember that this is why, we actually celebrate Hoonko today, is because Kakunyo was the one who started this type of tradition. So, and then of course, not only did he write the Godensho, but he also wrote he also wrote also important texts that are read during Hoonko called the Hoonko Shiki and the Tantokumon. Okay, these two scrolls that are read by the Monshu every 16th of January during the 10 a.m. service. And it's read in a very classical style and all in Kanbun, all in classical Chinese that has to be read in classical Japanese by the Monshu. And it's, okay, and again, right, people have this very egalitarian view of Jodo Shinshu, right, of the teachings. And that's not necessarily true. But if we want to talk about institution, right, there is a bit of like what we would consider to be like Dharma transference in terms of this school when it comes to Hoonko and listening to the Hoonko Shiki. Thankfully, I actually put the link on the Facebook page of Tacoma, but you can actually watch this service. So if you actually want to watch the service to where you can hear the Hoonko Shiki, which was written by Kakunyo Shonin, I would tune into the YouTube channel on not this Sunday, but next Sunday, the 15th at 5 p.m. because that is the 16th, 10 a.m. Japan time. Okay, so on the 15th at 5 p.m., you can watch the actual Hoonko service or Hoonko Saho at Nishi Honganji and listen to the Hoonko Shiki being read by Gomonshu-sama. Okay, and in a way, this is similar to when the act of doing this is kind of similar to like when a master presents Dharma transmission to his disciples. Okay, so if we're also going to credit Kakunyo with anything, and again, take with this as you will. I know that in America or in the West there are people, and probably in Japan too, but there are people who are not very into or very don't view establishment or institutionalism as a good thing. But if we're going to also credit Kakunyo with anything, we can actually credit him with the starting of institution of Honganji, right? Or the institution of, this sect, right? This is why, in a sense, right, like Honganji is not really kind of this willy-nilly type thing or like everything goes, right? There are rules and regulations. And again, not to say that the history itself has been, solid over the years, right? Obviously, Honganji split into two. But that being said, right, if we're going to, credit anybody with the beginning of institutionalism within Honganji, it's Kakunyo. And a big part of that has to do with the surrounding reverence and his culture of almost, I don't want to use the word deifying, but, deifying Shinran Shonin. And, even for for Kakunyo himself, he was not known to be a man who compromised very much. And in fact, and I don't know if this necessarily had anything to do with Shinran's relationship with his own son, Zenran, but Kakunyo himself had a pretty strained relationship with his son, Zonkaku. So if you notice, if you go back to page 77, the next Monshu is not, if you go back to page 77 of your Joro Shinshu's service books, you'll notice the fourth Monshu is Zenyo Shonin. It's not Zonkaku. This is because Kakunyo had again, like we say, like I said before, helped to establish this institution of Joro Shinshu, and he was kind of a stickler about that. Zonkaku, his firstborn son, was more liberal, I guess you could say, in terms of approaching other schools of Buddhism and how he would develop a relationship with them. And we also have to give Zonkaku credit for actually being able to start dialogue about Joro Shinshu with other schools of Buddhism, okay? But Kakunyo was a bit of a stickler, and because of this, he did not have the best relationship with his son Zonkaku, and he didn't outright disown him, okay? He never went that far, but he did tell his son, you're not the one who's going to take over after I'm gone. It's your brother, Zenyo. Actually, I don't think it was even his brother, but who's going to take over. So again, when you look at that dynasty of Monshu, right, it's never, ever just like father to firstborn son, father to firstborn son. It is in recent history, but it never, ever think that it's been that clean. There have been political rivalries and actually due to a succession issue. In fact, I should actually say succession issues is what split up Honganji in the first place, right? Between two brothers who were vying for the position of Monshu. So, Otani Honmyo is a significant space for us as Joro Shinshu Buddhists, especially at Nishi Honganji. There's actually a service that is established, there's a service that's done every year in October. That is the tradition that was started by the 16th Monshu named Jakunyo Shonin. It's a service that's called Ryukokue, and it's Otani Honmyo's Hoonko service at the grounds of Otani Honmyo, okay? And Jakunyo Shonin, another very influential Monshu, helped to establish that tradition as well. And houses some, for those of you who have been to Otani Honmyo before, just a little bit of context, this is sacred because it houses some of the remains of Shinran Shonin, right? His remains or his relics have been split up to other, Higashi Honganji has their own mausoleum. And then there are other independent temples outside of Honganji who claim to have bits of Shinran encased at their temple as well. There's one on the outskirts of Tokyo that claims that they have one of Shinran's teeth. I don't know how true that is, but it's what they say. So when we have Ryukokue, there's a special service that is conducted at Meichodo, and it's actually what's called the Hoonko Saho. Okay, this is the service that is done actually at Nishi Honganji every January 16th, and then on the October 15th and 16th, it's the one that is done at Otani Honmyo. And I, as Gonshiki students, both Kusunoki Sensei and I also had to take part in the service, more help with it. If you wonder why we know how to put Shichijo Gessa on, it's because part of our job during this Ryukokue was to dress the priests who would take part in the service with all the Shichijo Gessa and everything. And all of the service took part in Meichodo, this one right here. And this little guy up here, this little one is where Shinran's remains are stored. So there's priests and who are all in here, and then this whole area here is covered, and members are allowed to sit on this part of the ground. And then finally, later on that day, the Godensho is also recited in the Butsuden, this particular building right here. So so if you missed, if you didn't make it to Japan in time and you missed Hoonko, there's still a chance for you to listen to the Godensho in person, and that is October 16th in the Butsuden at Otani Honbyo. Yeah, and I think October is a pretty nice time to go, although apparently it's still hot in Kyoto at that time. Yeah, again, why would you go to Japan during the summertime, right? It's hot and it's humid. It's pretty miserable outside. But October, things are starting to cool down a little bit, but apparently it's still pretty hot, as they say. Okay, so finally, a lot of this information is available, and you are all very lucky because Professor Dobbins actually lives here in Seattle now. And I don't know if he attends service on a regular basis at Seattle Betsuin, but we've gotten to meet him. Like, I had a real nerd moment when I met him at Seattle's Open. I was like, oh my gosh, Professor Dobbins. Like people get excited when they meet celebrities. Like I'm too much of a nerd. I get excited when I meet history professors. So, but anyways, this book is available at the BCA bookstore. Read it. It is a treasure. Okay. Were you about to ask a question, Alex?
Is that the same as the question in the chat?
Yes.
Godensho, the English.
Okay, so yes.
I'll say it on the mic so they heard me too. Yeah. So this addresses the question in the chat about the Godensho English translation.
Yes. So I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that there does exist a book that has the English translations of the Godensho, or the chapters of what I just read, and of course has even descriptions of each of the pictures inside or right here of the scroll. The bad news is that this book is now out of print, so you will not find it at Barnes and Nobles or even like Powell's Books in Oregon, right?
Asking JSIO to be free.
You're asking JSIO to reprint this. So until that happens, this book is rare. Don't steal it from me. Reverend Cindy's already stole this from me once to take her to White River to show. So I had to sneakily get it back from her. So, but again, this book is great because not only, again, it shows, it has a plethora of pictures of pretty old prints of what the illustrations are, and it even has like little numbered descriptions of who the people are in the pictures. And then it not only that has that, but it has each of the chapters. It has each of the chapters of the Godensho that I read, and notes. Again, this is where you can tell I'm kind of a history nerd. Like, I get, of course, really excited about the text itself, but then the notes that go with them. Look at how many notes there are that go along with this, because there's a lot of context that explains what the Godensho is actually talking about, and the historical facts of the time that it was written. So, this book is, to me, is like a real precious treasure for me. Okay, so, but when JSIO eventually is able to reprint this, right? And I should also mention the reason why is because Inagaki Sensei sadly passed away a few years ago. So when that happens, there's licensing issues about a person's intellectual property, right? And how you go about, getting the permission to reprint this and everything like that. What I will say is, if you're interested at all, like, when the seminar is finished, I will go ahead and I'll put the book here so you can look through it for a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and end my talk here because we're almost at 2:30. But I also want to open it to questions to if anybody has any questions about my topic today. Did you all learn something new? Yes. Okay. All right. Yes.
Another question. So, this is like history of Shinran life.
So they could hear on Zoom.
So this is history of of Shinran Shonin's life.
Mhm.
Was this a common practice to write these histories of important religious leaders in Japan? Like, there's lots of different Jodo Shinshu schools. Do they have their version with different pictures and
Sure.
different stories?
Sure. So, okay, so that is actually a really great question. I don't know how common it was or like if there was like an actual practice of writing like historical biographies necessarily of people. When you read about a lot of these religious leaders like Nichiren and things like that, Nichiren actually, I should say, Nichiren was not shy at all about writing about himself. If you read Nichiren's writings, he's very like, he actually gives a lot of historical context as to what he did, but also promoting himself as well. But a lot of the biographies that I've read of these people were taken from historical texts that were written about them, like in like ways like of the Godensho, letters, and things like that. Like that's why for a lot of like these historical figures, it's kind of hard to find information about them because they themselves never really sat down for an interview, or and a lot of their escapades are sort of somewhat legendary as well. So, so I don't know about like a practice per se. There was, however, a practice of especially in terms of the Buddhist world, of being a disciple of a master and being given permission to copy the work, right? So that Shinran Shonin was a disciple of Master Honen because he's listed in a registry of that. But then also, according to Shinran, he was given permission to actually write or like copy some of Honen Shonin's major works. And that was actually seen as a type of also Dharma transmission. So to continue that. And then, of course, you would sign the signature of, who actually copied it at the time. So again, right, like, was there a common practice of like a person's biography the same way that we in the United States have of when after a president is president, they get a portrait automatically? I'm not sure, but I do know that many biographies have been written, but based on a lot of secondhand sources. Some firsthand sources, but a lot of secondhand sources too. And I'm sorry, did you have a second part to your question?
I don't know.
This might be sort of out there, but there's so many different Jodo Shinshu schools besides ours.
Yes.
Do they have different ways of
yes,
thinking
so
about his life?
So it's very interesting. And that's actually also why I highly recommend this book, because actually Dobbins goes into some of the other schools of Jodo Shinshu in this book. He talks about the Takata school and who was in charge of that. Especially also Bukkoji. A lot of the other sects of Buddhism. So sorry, to backtrack a little second here. Nishi and Higashi Konganji are two institutions or two schools of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism that are directly linked to Shinran through the lineage of their head priests, right? Whereas like the other schools like Bukkoji, Takaraha, right, those ones were headed by people who considered themselves to be disciples of Shinran. So one of the legends about Bukkoji, and I need to make sure I get to the other there's actually there's Shinshu the Shinshu factions, and then the Shinshu factions of the various schools. But Bukkoji has kind of an interesting history between Honganji, specifically Renyo Shonin at the time. Bukkoji was not very happy with Renyo because they kind of they accused Renyo of stealing members from their temples. So there's a famous story of when Renyo actually makes like a walk through the streets of Kyoto and he's with all of his attendants and everything, there's legends of Bukkoji which you could actually visit. It's not that far away in Kyoto, but there's legends of Bukkoji closing the doors to their temple and everything. But let's see, Bukkoji, the person who was Bukkoji's founder, Ryogen. So I actually, one of my closest friends in Chubutsu, actually, when I was training in Japan at the time, actually comes from the Bukkoji sect. And she actually gave me a little history about Bukkoji's school and everything. And one of the things that Ryogen, the leader of Bukkoji, who started it at the time, claimed was that Shinran had a secret meeting with him and said, I officially, recognize you as the true understanding of my teachings and everything. Whether that historically happened or not is up for debate, right? But anyway, but again, right, all these stories I think are somewhat created. Even Honganji is not innocent of this, right? But to sort of establish legitimacy of their school. So there are actually 10 schools of Jodo Shinshu currently in Japan. Okay. And all of them have their own. Takaraha actually has a wealth of original treasures and my personal of scrolls that were handwritten by Shinran. And the way that some of the Jodo Shinshu sect says is they stole it, or they ran off with it when there was the split between or not the split, but when the establishment of Honganji kind of actually happened, and then some of these statues and treasures or scrolls were written, Takaraha kind of took it and ran. So anyways, but approach that with a grain of salt and everything. But yeah, all of the schools have a claim to being directly influenced by Shinran, and how shall I say, sort of the, being legitimized by him. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, we are right at 2:30 now, which is when the seminar is supposed to end. I certainly enjoyed. You can see how enthusiastic I am about history, but but I thoroughly enjoyed spending time with you all today, and hoped you learned something a little bit new. But I will end with this: if you are ever in Kyoto, or if you ever make a special trip out to Kyoto during the time of Goshoki Hoonko, please visit Nishi Honganji and watch one of the services. You have 4 services a day to choose from: a 6 a.m. service, a 10 a.m. service, a 2 p.m. service, and a 3:30 p.m. service. All of them are wonderful to attend and to visit, and it's something to see. And I hope that even this presentation today kind of helped to bring more of an appreciation of why we actually do Hoonko in the first place. Okay, so thank you all so much, and we'll close with Godensho. Namandats, 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 namandats. Hi, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tadao Sensei, for the wonderful seminar. So I also have this book. Then I went to visit this temple. This is the last trip I went with my father. So that's a Ibaragi prefecture. Then one of the temple Shinran Shonin was living when he was in Kanto area. He was at this temple. So Tadao Sensei mentioned, there's a 10 Jodo Shinshu school sect. So this temple doesn't belong to any sect of those 10 groups. So they're kind of independent temple, but still Jodo Shinshu. Then there's another temple that they say their founder is Nyoshin. That's the second Gomonshu. So there's another temple in Ibaragi prefecture. There's a lots of unique temple related to Shinran Shonin. So there's another temple, Takataha Senjuji. So this year, November, December, Seattle Betsuin is having a tour to Japan. then one of the destination to visit Takataha. That's a head temple of Takataha Senjuji. Well, thank you again for the seminar today. Then he's gonna be the speaker tomorrow for Hoonko service. Then he's also lead the Dharma exchange tomorrow. Okay. どうもありがとうございました。Thank you so much. Thank you. 先生ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。Thank you. Thank you, everyone.